Welcome to San Diego Integral, March 12th, 2022. Today's topic, Paradoxes, Polarities, and Interdependence of Individual and Collective Development, presented by Abigail Lynam. And now our host, Eloy Mays.
Welcome to San Diego Integral. I'm Eloy Mays. I'm a member of the San Diego Integral leadership team. And we have an exciting presentation today on Polarities, Paradoxes, and Collective Development by Abigail Lynam. And we'll begin shortly after a few announcements. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. You probably saw the message. The link for the recording will be posted in a couple of days when we get it all edited. And we're probably going to post this to a private YouTube channel because it seems to be a better hosting and viewing place than just having the Google link. If you prefer not to be seen on video, you can just turn your camera off and you can type any questions you have in the chat box, and one of our leadership team here will ask the question to Abigail at an appropriate moment. And we do like to see your faces if you feel comfortable. I mean, even just putting your camera up for a while and waving and saying hello. That's always nice to see the faces of the people that are here. And please stay for our open conversation after the formal meeting. We go at least a half an hour and often an hour longer, and sometimes there's a lot of really good conversation there. You can find our events on our website at sandiegointegral.org, and we're on Meetup and Facebook, so you can follow us there as well. And if you have any questions or comments about any of these meetings, you can contact any one of our leadership team, which includes myself, Jerry Golick, Tom Habib, Kathleen and Andrews, and Liz O'Grady. Thank you. And next month, we're going to be meeting on April 9th, and the topic will be Who Are You? An Integral Understanding of Gender with Sally Adams Jones. And also this in 2 weeks on Saturday the 26th, we're having a special session at 11 a.m. Pacific on collective presencing with the author of the book of Collective Presencing, Ria Beck. So there'll be a posting on the meetup shortly for that one. So it's a different time than we're used to. It's on the fourth Saturday instead of the second. So please save the date for both of those. And finally, we ask if you can to make a small donation to San Diego Integral to help offset our costs of meetup and other expenses. You can do that at sandiegointegral.org. There's a donation page and a button. Okay, I think that's it. I'll pass this on to Tom Habib, who's going to introduce Abigail. Take it away, Tom.
And it's my pleasure to introduce Abigail Lynam. Abigail is a coach for Pacific Integral and faculty for the Emergent Leadership and Generating Transformative Change programs known as GTC. She is also faculty for Fielding Graduate University's PhD in Human and Organizational Development. In addition, Abigail is a scoring coach of Stages International and a qualified administrator of the Intercultural Developmental Inventory. Abigail has 20 years experience in transformative learning, cross-cultural competence in adult development, coaching, and leadership development. Abigail's scholarship and practice integrates the interior dimensions of human knowledge and experience with interpersonal and collective change. The tools and technologies for transformative change she utilizes includes Theory U, integral polarity practice, which she's going to be talking about today, immunity to change, shadow work, leadership embodiment, dialogue, and contemplative practices. Abigail lives in the Pacific Northwest and reportedly loves to move and play in nature. I was on a panel with Abigail at the Integral Practitioner Conference last April, sponsored by Meridian University. What quickly became apparent to me was Abigail had strong capabilities to recognize and open the deeply subtle and open energetic space that other presenters could utilize for connection and exploration. There are several people associated with GTC with these capabilities, including her lifelong partner, Jeff Finch, and former colleague, Vinita Ramirez and Terry O'Fallon. So please join me in giving Abigail a warm San Diego Integral welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your generous introduction. Hello, everybody. I feel so honored and really happy to have this time together. And I feel both excited and nervous. And it's really a pleasure to see some familiar faces and names. I want you to know that I'm joining today as a fellow journeyer, as a practitioner, to just explore together the territory of I and we development and what we can learn together. So not coming as a presenter necessarily, not coming with a particular expertise that I want to deliver, but more to invite us into a practice field together. Because goodness knows there's so much that we don't yet understand, and in my humble sense of how we humans at the level of the human family can grow and deepen and work together for a more flourishing and just world. So I come with a lot of humility and an intention to practice together, and really want to invite us all into that. And so there was an invitation to turn on your cameras if you're able, just so that we can bring an extra degree of presence to one another. And if you're not able, so be it. You're still wholly with us. So I'm going to start us off with a brief presencing practice, and then I'll give some introduction, and we'll move into some other practices. So if you're comfortable and it's good for you, you can lower your gaze and just come present to yourself, your body, this particular moment. So invite us to lower your gaze, close your eyes if you're willing. Just make contact with your body and your breath in this very moment. And we will keep carrying on in spite of some of that pain expressing itself. So just feeling your body in this particular moment, contacting your breath and whatever's present, whether it's something in body, mind, heart that you came into the call with, or something that was evoked in that moment, whatever it is, just be present to yourself and the dimensions of your experience in this moment, nothing needing to change. In a way, I can feel the poignancy of whatever that voice was expressing into our space, and how it's an opportunity for practice to find a deeper ground and a deeper trust that actually makes room for disruption and dissonance in our space. As you connect and ground with yourself in this very moment, also notice if you're coming to the call with a yearning, an intention, a desire for yourself. And as you presence that, also allow yourself to open your field of awareness to take in a larger whole, whatever that is for you, to include each other on this call, those that will listen to the recording, and also our world with all of its joys and pains, beauty and harms. Feeling your own heart of connection to what's happening and also what's possible together. And as we're ready, we'll open our eyes, come back visually present to one another. All right, so I'm going to guide us into a little bit of framing around the work together. And, you know, I honestly can't help but be struck by the kind of irony or paradox of whatever that voice was that just came into our collective space. In a way, it kind of expresses some of the tensions between the I and the we. So we're going to be working right in this area of individual and collective development. And the acknowledgement is that there's no such thing as individual development free of collective development. So there's a paradox in that we actually need each other to grow and develop. And at the same time, some of the ways we structure our systems, some of our habit patterns in cultures and in groups also create limitations, create harm and so forth. And also complementarily, we were raised in collectives, and a lot of our trauma, both in our own lives as well as generationally and historically, is present in these relationships. So there's a bind, there's a paradox, there's something that we're so vulnerable to, and yet again, to grow and develop ourselves, we need to grow and develop our collectives, and the two are completely interdependent and ultimately not separate. So that's the territory that we're in together. And we'll be working with some practices to explore how that sits in you and in us together on the call today. And what I'll be sharing a little bit about is our work with Pacific Integral. And this comes from our own explorations and sort of evolution and practice in supporting the development of cohorts as they go through the Generating Transformative Change program and its evolution over time. So some of the practices that have come out of that, some of the insights, and also some of the places where we're still growing and discovering. So to support that, I'm gonna bring in a couple slides, and then we'll move into a practice. I'm going to touch into a few images and a few kind of guiding principles around some of these practices. So we care about evolution, and we are in a paradox, which is if we lived in a just and equitable and flourishing world for all of humanity and all of life, then likely the growth and development of the individual would be a natural and easy phenomena, and vice versa. So once again, we need one another, and we're also limited by one another. So it's just the recognition that I and we co-evolve, while at the same time we're co-creating and co-limiting one another. So how do we do that, and what are some of the ways we can liberate some of those co-limitations? So one of the founders of Pacific Integral is Terry O'Fallon, and she often talks about that we're 10-foot tall beings living in rooms with 5-foot tall ceilings. So how can we touch the sacred ground of who we always and already are and lift the ceiling on each other's development? So just a little bit about the practice that we've been engaging with. So Pacific Integral has been engaged in about 20 years of transformative developmental work. I've been involved for about 15 years. I was a participant in GTC, and now I'm also contributing as faculty. mentioned the Generating Transformative Change program. It's 9 months, it's retreat-based. So we do in-person 5-day retreats over those 9 months. And we also do some work online. So we have an offering that we are calling Emergent Leadership, Engaging the Future from Awakened Wholeness. So this is something we brought forward during the pandemic, which actually has been a really rich experience of doing this work in more virtual contexts. And again, these are practice fields. These are explorations, and I could say experiments in a way. So as I was mentioning, GTC, intimate long-term cohort-based work. We integrate and include or take an integral, evolutionary, embodied, and research-based approach. So one of the things we've been doing over the 20 years, 30 plus cohorts, is engaging in some developmental research, doing pre and post assessments. And we have some of the data of that actually is quite startling in ways, and I could share more about that probably in the after call and some of the resources that I'll be sharing. And also engaging in our own development, again, recognizing that we're all growing and developing and we haven't figured this thing out. So how can we grow, develop, and learn together? And it's grounded in an ethic of care for the evolution of planetary life. Deep ethic of care. So GTC itself is offered in the South Pacific, it's offered in North America, and then also it has been offered a few times in Ethiopia. And one of the reasons I wanted to share one of the Ethiopian cohorts is what an experience for us to learn about how these practices were received and also evolved in a collective-oriented culture. So there was so much learning for us in having the opportunity to collaborate and bring GTC with some Ethiopian colleagues to this particular cultural context. A lot of learning for us, some commonalities and also some very unique differences. So some of the practices that we work with, and I will move through this fairly quickly, and we can always touch back later to get into greater depth. Individual and collective shadow work. So these are some of the ways we co-limit and have the possibility to co-liberate each other. Diane Hamilton often talks about sameness and difference and the need to integrate both in collectives as they work together. And and so through collective shadow work, we start to open up some of those co-limiting patterns, paying attention to habit patterns as collectives form. So we bring in our historic collectives, culturally, our families and so forth, and we start to reenact those habits in relationships, in a cohort life. And so how can we pay attention to those patterns as they show up so we can start to work with them and open them up? So we find practices around love and truthfulness, courage and vulnerability. We work with somatic and embodied awareness practices, individual and collective practices. So we work with meditation, for instance, and we do that also in relationship. We integrate and work with theory U, and so here co-sensing, co-presencing, co-emerging, we polarity practices, and always coming back to and pointing to vulnerability, trust, inquiry, empathy, and wonder. So a few more kind of key points here is that as we work with the I and we polarity, recognizing that the life of a polarity moves from either or to both and to the interpenetration and the ultimate unity or oneness out of which that polarity originally arose. And so we're working with those stages or phases of the polarity. And also to recognize that there's not a single I or a we, but that the I and the we itself also evolved developmentally. So some images that point to that, and again I'll just touch on them briefly, but some of the readings go into this in greater depth. So just a recognition that there's different layers or dimensions to what we mean by the I and the we. We can look at this through different developmental frames, and partly because some of my work is informed by Terry O'Fallon Stage's work and ego development more broadly, it's one of the frames that we bring to our work. So here, sort of gives a visual image of how the I and the we co-develop, can co-develop. And so, for instance, as we grow and develop, we move through more concrete stages of development, more subtle stages, and more. We can call them causal or meta-aware. And even as we develop, let's say, subtle capacities, our collectives have the potential to be both concrete and subtle. As we grow into meta-aware causal capacities, the collectives that we're engaging with tend to be subtle. And so it's just the recognition that there are, again, the I and the we are co-evolving, but there's also different developmental dimensions to both. So this is just to revisit this essential recognition, which is that our hurts and our pains lie at the intersection of the I and the we. And that working with shadow work and paradox of the two can help to build some capacity and resources for co-evolution. I'm going to pause the share here. And we're going to go into another practice. So I want to invite a guided visualization around an I and we polarity. And as we go along, through this offering together, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll engage with those questions as we come to a dialogue space more towards the end of our time. So I'm going to guide us through a practice, and then we're going to go into triads to share about your experience of the practice. So for this practice, you can close your eyes if you'd like, you can lower your gaze, and you might have a pen if you want to write some sort of reflective thoughts, but just invite you to move into a more of an internal space for the practice. Take a deep breath, let go of everything and anything that I've spoken of at this point. Make contact with your body again. What we're working with here is the paradox of the I and the we as a doorway to greater wholeness. So as you sit with yourself, I want to invite you to call up a collective that you're connected to. Could be family, could be a community of some kind, primary relationship. So call up a collective that you feel very much a part of, one that you love and appreciate the experience of belonging. What's it like to feel a part of a collective, to have that sense of this is us? There's a we here, a sense of being home. Feel that in your body. What does the world look like from that sense of the we? What does it feel like to belong? And as I go through this visualization or reflection, just allow whatever's true for you to come up. So it may not follow my words, and that's absolutely fine. And so at this moment, I'm going to invite you to breathe and let go of what I just invited, the particular collective that you feel a part of. Just allow that to, just let that go for the moment. And now I want to invite you to call up your own sense of being an individual separate from this very collective. What does it feel like to be in your I? You're aware of the group, and you also have a sense of I am me. Your own sense of being an individual, a sense of agency. You can do stuff. You can engage with the collective. You can step in and out of the collective. What does it feel like to be in your own sense of independence and sovereignty? What does that feel like in your body? What does the world look like from this place? And now I want to invite you to exhale and let that go. Sometimes we can feel a sense of conflict between the I and the we. It might be a feeling of feeling divided, that you can only have one, not both. And so oftentimes there's a lot of charge around this, some emotion, some meaning, that it's hard to be you and to feel a part of a group. Just notice where the bind can show up. See if you can stand in a place between the I and the we, a place where you can see both, but you're also at a balance or a still point between the two. Part of you is part of the collective, and a part of you is separate and sovereign. Just allow yourself to encounter a place of balance between the two. Beyond the divide and beyond the conflict. What does that feel like? The both and. And when you're ready, you can exhale and release that. And now I want to invite us all to step into a space that transcends and includes either pole. A place where you can connect to a larger wholeness that includes the I and the we. What does this feel like? To touch into, to open to this greater wholeness that isn't divided, that includes it all, separate and connected, a part of, and a sense of self with agency and sovereignty. Notice if you need to let go of something to allow this greater whole to open up. And notice if there's any feeling or emotion that arises in that opening. Sometimes there can be heartbreak to release where we might have been holding back or not able to make contact with this greater whole of who we already are. Sometimes it releases a sense of liberation and deep connection to all. And then take a breath and let that go. And when you're ready, you can raise your eyes again, come back visually present. And I'm going to invite us to go into a triad sharing with one another, just to share a little bit about what that experience was like. And in particular, to bring forward in your sharing, what's an edge for you or a stretch for you in the I-we polarity? What are you learning, or how are you being stretched? And as you engage with each other in this triad sharing, see if you can really be on that edge rather than just talking about it. So be vulnerable to it, speak from the heart. You'll have 20 minutes in the triads, 5 minutes each for sharing. And then in that last few minutes, there'll be one more part to the sharing, and we'll put the questions in the chat so you know what you're being invited to do. I'm just going to have a quick look and see if they're there. And if not, I'm going to drop them into the chat. Hang on a moment. Okay, here we are. What's a growth edge for you in the I-we polarity? What do you yearn for? And what's a challenge? What might you need to let go of or to open up to realize this more deeply? 5 minutes for each of you, and then a second round where you're going to explore an additional element. We'll send it in a message to you all. So Kathleen, if you're ready, we can go into triads.
And if you don't want to participate, you can just stay in the main room and wait for us to come back.
Sounds good.
Set up for 20 minutes total. So we'll see you when you all get back, and I will post the questions again that's just went into chat into the breakout rooms.
Welcome back. Hello, everyone. As we come back into the space, just take a moment to breathe, let go, come present, and we're going to take a little bit of time for some sharing, some reflection, some dialogue together. So just open up the space. And Kathleen, is there anything you want to share about how people can do that? Whether they need to raise their hands or just open up the mic?
I think with the size of group we have right here, we'll kind of alternate back and forth between people that raise their hands or go in chat. Right now, nobody's got raised hands. We'll give some time to that because people give a little time for people to come up with something. Yeah, go ahead.
Great.
It was interesting in our group because as we tried to hold that polarity between I and we, one of our group members called it liminal space. And I wrote it down as luminosity. And that was interesting to me because it just seems to be a dynamic space that we're open to the possibilities of what we might ignite just by holding that. You know, like the invitation that we can connect at the deeply subtle level. You know, while I hold me steady and quiet, and then open up the possibility of that connection. So I became aware it became two ways that if both people are conscious of it, it's dynamic, that it becomes two ways, and the possibilities of what it might emerge become very, very rich. So I'm kind of glad I made a mistake and wrote it as luminosity rather than liminal.
That's nice to hear that. It's always possible. And I think something important to notice is what enables that and what makes that challenging. So that as, you know, and I always thinking about polarities from the I to the we, as well as contraction and expansion. You know, we often have a preference for one over the other. And if we have a preference for expansion, we find ourselves in contraction. What are the options to be with that contraction in a way that can help to open up a little bit more of that liminality and or the luminosity that can arise? It's lovely to hear about. Other sharings.
I'll jump in. Something that occurred to me was not looking at the I-we as a polarity. They're just different. And setting up as a polarity is, for me, it's a dysfunctional framing. It's a problematic framing, maybe is a better word than dysfunctional. They're just different. I'm aware of, in the group I was referring to in our breakout, that I'm aware of the sovereign I, I'm aware of the we. And they didn't feel like a polarity to me. There's a lot of trust in that group by design, by intention, by practice. So anyhow, so that's my point, that I and we, the whole polarity thing doesn't work for me. It just to hold it as just difference and working.
You want to say more about what feels dysfunctional about framing it as a polarity?
Yeah, polarity, good question. I hold polarity somewhat as north-south, opposites. And for example, men and women relationships, well, any relationships, but I use men and women. To look at that as a polarity, I think, is unhealthy. To look at it as there's men and women are different. They're not opposites. So I hold polarity a little bit as opposites. So maybe this is a romantic thing here. But
yeah,
I think it's a big mistake.
I'm glad to have you share a little bit more about that, and what I'm aware of in the moment, and Suzanne, I'm thinking about some of your work about the life of a polarity in the developmental process, and so we can notice how the world arises oftentimes, and we make distinctions in our mind, and so the world arises in this and that. And this and that can feel really separate and never connected. But in the life of a polarity, we can move from highly polarized to either or, to both and, to one within the other, to never separate. So that's how I'm holding the notion of polarity. And so noticing how when there's a charge for us in relationship to the other pole, we're often polarized. But actually, a polarity itself, as you're pointing to, in a sense, is a way of understanding something that are two sides of the same coin are never separate. But it's important to notice where we are with whatever the poles are that we're working with, because some things are more polarized in us and other things are more integrated. And the point of noticing it is also for the sake of deeper integration, because it's so important to notice what we're including and what we're excluding. And, we're all doing both, right? We all have profound blind spots to what we haven't yet integrated. And so it's really important to be able to work in both directions. So thanks for bringing more distinction to that. I see a hand up. Karen.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
And yes, Larry, I was interested. I have a somewhat different take on polarity, and I probably got this from somewhere in one of Ken Wilber's tomes. But to me, a polarity is dynamic. I've really invested in the North Pole, South Pole metaphor for polarity, where there's a flow, there's a magnetic flow, it's not static. And the North Pole never directly sees the South Pole. The South Pole can never directly see the North Pole, but there's an energy exchange. It's a magnetic field like the field around the Earth. And that's motion, that's manifestation. You have the primal duality, and then you have a flow, energy, something's happening. And so it's life, it's excitement. It's or like, I guess another metaphor for me is a battery that has two nodes. And when you connect them, it's like a big energy circuit. So polarity to me means energy moving, something's happening. And then just sort of a segue into my experience in this group, I was interested to hear you discussing expansion and contraction, because that was my experience. A polarity between I and we, and the felt experience of it when I put I put myself kind of in the experience of being with my chosen group, which is an expansion of energy. And then when I put myself in the experience of being my separate self, the energy pulled in. But it was a stable and positive experience. But there was definitely an opposition in the energy, this expansive energy versus this kind of a lowering of the tone and a pulling in. So that was my experience.
it sounded like you were playing with that in the group experience, and or was that being kind of brought up by the way the group time was unfolding? Did you notice that?
Well, it was my experience during your guided meditation.
I see. Oh, okay.
And then it was among the things I presented in the group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we can notice, right, how sometimes we can feel so connected to a collective. So in this case, I'm thinking about, someone in relationship to their family, so connected, so much so that it actually can feel violent to have a sense of your own separate self as an individual. And if we lose track of ourselves as an individual, if we lose track of that differentiation, there's no self to engage in relationship. So we actually need, there's movement through the polarity, but we also need all of these layers of the polarity to actually have a self to engage in connection with. And there's a deeper unity that is always present, both, available at any moment, we can open to in ourselves, and we can also open to as a collective. But but the differentiation and the integration are so important. We'll take a few more minutes for a couple other experiences. Anybody that wants to bring in something that feels different or even challenging to bring forward? Suzanne.
Well, we moved a bit differently. We started out with the anxiety of now COVID being open and going out into public spaces again, and being somewhat afraid. And simply we did a process. We ended up saying, but there is no individual self. We're full of germs and viruses anyway, the gut stuff, the skin is permeable. So how can we make what we feel is an intrusion into an ally and feel in that way much more connected?
That's beautiful. Thank you. Can really feel the sort of multi-layers of that we're talking about all of this from and as, and so in a way it's complex and maybe sometimes it feels complicated, and could just make room for all of it. There's nothing that needs to get sorted out, while tracking each of our own experiences of what it means to be in relationship, and where we can open to connection and where we get caught, and also the sort of possibilities for working with the contractions as they arise, the kind of the pulling back, the way we can hold ourselves separate. But again, we need the self to open to that deeper coherence or I think you said luminosity, Tom. Garima, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah,
Please
you got it.
Correct me. Great.
You got it. So, I mean, I talked a little in my group about, like I was born into a collective culture, but I was raised in the States. So I've always had this tension between like being me and being in a society that's highly individual, versus like the family that I was born into and like the immigrant community that I was born into here that is Indian, which is very, very communal. So like, for me, community is a negative experience where it's more encroaching upon you. And it's less about you being your individual self in the community and more about being a part of the community. They often will use like really like tactics of kind of policing your behavior to encourage conformity. But like, I guess, is there a logic to that? And also, how would you recommend, I don't know, coping with it, I guess? It's literally the biggest challenge of my life is figuring out how I can be me around these people and be comfortable. And it's like, it's made it challenging for me to find other communities that are not like that. I always end up in similar situations, even when I'm not with these people. any friend groups, they always end up being kind of bullying and policing and you know, people I don't feel comfortable being vulnerable with. So yeah, I guess like I guess how do you deal with it when community is a challenge to the self?
I'm so glad you're raising the question, because that's, you know, I mean, it's one of the, you know, it's right at the heart of what we're engaging with here. And it's really something that you said, that you find yourself, you know, you go seek out other communities, and some of the same patterns are present in the community. So one of the things that is often the case, right, is that the collectives we're raised in, we actually internalize some of those patterns, and we can repeat those patterns unconsciously when we go into new collectives. So we bring our, you know, our family and our cultural context with us in ways that, you know, we may be more or less conscious about. One of the gifts of that is actually just what you're talking about, which is, as you learn to address that in the groups that you're a part of, then you're going to start to, you know, open that up, support your own development, and liberate that part of you that feels somehow like it has to, you know, follow along or conform, as you were saying, conform to the constraints of the collective. So, you know, this again it's part of the paradox, because again, we create the collectives that we're a part of, and the collectives create us. There's nowhere to stand outside of this particular paradox. And so the only way to work with this is to go through the process of, I could say, you know, we could say growing yourself up in the collective, which is to, you know, I mean, just as an example, here's, you know, if you have enough of a shared understanding as a group, and or you're in a group that has a kind of commitment to grow and develop together, it's actually naming the challenges as they're arising. You know, this is happening, it's hard for me, I'm wondering how we can begin to, you know, change this pattern. It might be more in you than it is in the group, but I bet it's both. And that's really what we have in front of us. And each of us has that possibility. We have it here, we have it in every context that we're in, to, you know, it's not raising the hand, but it's a little bit like, you know, there's something here that's really at stake for me, or that I'm struggling with. Are you in for working with me around starting to disrupt some of these patterns? And that's actually what we're going to work with. The next practice is going to be looking at what are some of those habit patterns in groups that co-limit, but also can co-liberate. So I don't know if that helps, but I see a tremendous opportunity in what you're pointing to.
I mean, I hope that the community is not really interested. They don't really want to talk about it. So I'm kind of on my own in that. Even in my own family, though, it's a challenge. I'll bring it up in my own family when I see the patterns of the community in the family, and I will point it out and say, we need to deal with this. And I have had some success with that, but with the community itself, like nothing.
Yeah, it's hard. And so finding a conscious collective to work with some of these dynamics makes such a difference. And then you can take what you learn from that, you know, that sort of learning space, community of practice, and then bring it into these other contexts. And, you know, family is one of the hardest, right? Because so many of our patterns are put in place in families, and to disrupt those patterns. I think about the patterns I struggle with in my family that I've been reporting for about 50 years. I came up with a new strategy the other day. Somebody was talking about the power of the pause, asking for a pause, because one of the things that happens in my family is this sort of runaway conversation. And so anyway, so I just, you know, still looking for new possibilities to help to disrupt. And that it's partly because I struggle with that. You know, there's a need that I have that I've struggled to bring into my own family context, but families are often the hardest. But the gift here is that the work that we do around these patterns is important, not just for our own individual development, but for our collective learning. Because as we know, we humans are facing so many challenges, and if we don't find some ways to grow and develop, to co-liberate one another, we're facing some, the challenges of the world are growing us, and if we can grow up and wake up to address them more fully, then we might have a way to live our way into a different kind of a future. So it's good work, but it's hard work.
It strikes me, Abigail, in your issues about families, all the developmental baggage that we carry, is the intimate couple, when they try to realize the collective, and how often they say, I really want to be closer, but how many roadblocks get thrown up in the moment when they're on that precipice actually to get closer. So I'm always kind of jealous of when you have a group like GTC people, that they have some languaging for this, some awareness that this territory actually exists without all the complications of intimacy, at least that level of intimacy. I'm always jealous of that because it feels like you can push the edge even further. Whereas when I get couples together, just to stabilize that moment of deeper connection, it's practically a miracle.
Yeah, it's such a good point that you're making. And I do believe that, I think it's why we need these kind of, sort of conscious developmental containers to support us to practice and experiment with some different ways of being. And it's one of the things we'll do in the GTC program is invite people to take on a role that they would almost never otherwise take on in a group. So if you tend to be the one who holds the role of being the joker, what would it be like to pick something that might be almost the opposite of that, to just explore some new expressions of self, because we're bundles of habit patterns and we don't always know it. And so, there's all kinds of possibility. And I agree, Tom, I feel, I feel that's, it's one of the places, the sources of sort of feeling humble or humility is that, I'm really given to this work. I absolutely love it. And I feel so humble when it comes to my own home life and how much I can struggle to really enact and embody some of these practices. So it's an ever living, ever evolving practice. So I'm gonna support us to go into the next practice just to explore another layer of, so this is actually looking at habit patterns in collectives. So you can, what we're going to go into groups of 4 to explore this together. And I really want to invite us all, as you go into the group of 4, to not just talk about this thing, but to actually to endeavor to practice what you're speaking about. So there's a difference between just talking about something and actually putting yourself on your own sort of developmental or growth edge and being vulnerable to the thing that can be challenging in group environments. So what we're exploring here are the kind of habit patterns that can limit collectives and the kind of habit patterns that can start to liberate collectives. And as I was saying before, we can't ever stand outside of, this is the paradox, we can't ever stand outside of this sort of the I, we, outside of the collectives that we're a part of, because we are a part of them. And so if we want to support their growth and development, you could say in a sense, the habit patterns in each of us is the source of these habit patterns. We bring in different ones from our cultural and our family backgrounds, and we are the source of those patterns. So what we're going to engage with in this next round of inquiry is, how are we the source of patterns that both limit and liberate collectives? And then the additional questions are, what supports opening into greater depth, coherence, and capacity to engage with conflict and integrate differences? So what are you learning in collectives that works well? And what are you learning that makes it more challenging? But how are these showing up in you? And then also, if you notice that you're being challenged, even in this little group of 4, just an invitation and an encouragement to open to vulnerability, trust, truthfulness, courage, and inquisitiveness. So if you find yourself struggling, see if you can vulnerably express yourself or ask a question or embody a sense of not knowing. So these are some of the pointers that help us to open up some of the ways that we can bring in habit patterns from our past that create limitations for collectives. So the main question is how are we the source of these patterns, and what supports collectives to open up, to deepen, to co-evolve well together? What liberates rather than limits? So those are the two questions. They've been put in the chat. We're gonna have 20 minutes in a collective of 4. And again, be on your own edge and see if you can embody the practices and speak from your heart rather than just talking about it as a sort of third person object. Kathleen, if we're ready.
Yeah, I've got the breakouts rooms made up. They'll end up being, looks like mostly groups of 4. I think I'd rather leave it up to you guys to flow one naturally, but try to make it like 5 minutes each person. But since there's some groups of 3 and some groups of 4, and it might move naturally a little bit earlier or later, I'm not gonna keep distracting you with comments coming in. So have a great
and actually, I'm going to modify that a touch. Sorry for the at the risk of confusion. I would say leave it more as an open conversation, but also attend to including everybody. So it doesn't have to be 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, but be in a conversation about this and see how you can actually practice what you're speaking about.
That's good. So I'll see you back in 20 minutes.
Welcome back, everybody. Take a moment to feel your feet on the ground, yourself in the seat. Make contact with your breath and just let go anything that was being stimulated and talked about in your little group there. Give yourself a moment of pause. And as we come back into our whole group space, I invite us to, as you're feeling connected, grounded, centered in yourself, just to softly, with a soft gaze, take in each other on the screen. Just notice who's here with us as a whole collective. Sometimes I like to recognize that each of us are individual expressions of a greater whole, different eyes looking out from a single source. See if you can open to that and take each other in as brothers and sisters with similarities and difference, but ultimately not separate. And as we open into this final round of dialogue together, see if you can allow other people's words to hear each other's words as if they were your own. So sometimes something you might want to say is spoken by another in a way that you can almost scarcely imagine. So there's something beautiful and mysterious about that. And also to recognize that we're sharing a collective field here, and the way we're present with each other, present to ourselves, actually really shapes that field. So see, even as you're bringing your own thoughts forward, raising your hand, bringing in a comment or an experience or a question, see if you can feel the collective as you do that. So stay connected to this larger whole, just to stay in practice together. And the question that we're going to engage with in this remaining time is, what are we learning? So what did you experience in that practice together? And also, what is the planet, the world calling from us in these times? And how does what we've been talking about and practicing with, how does it matter? So those are the 2 questions, and really look forward to hearing from anyone that wants to share. What did you learn and experience in your practice group, and also what's being called from in these times, and how do these practices matter for that? How might they touch the places where there's systems breakdown and deep conflict in the world? All right, opening up the conversation. please raise your hand and or bring your comments, questions into the chat. Garima.
Right. So we had a really productive chat, which I might have talked a little more than I should have, but Karen was saying something really cool about how, what is it? We were talking about the things that we like do well when it comes to like, liberating the community, and when it comes to limiting the community. And I was talking about how I limit the community that I grew up in by being like afraid to be myself. Because, and we talked about the pattern of that is from when I was a child. I was raised, in the community. It was always, you need to conform, you need to be quiet. You're really not allowed to speak your truth. Everyone kind of needs to be the same way. And that's born from like a larger generational thing of like, in India, you really couldn't be, the way your economic survival depended on your reputation as a family, as a community, as people. So, it depended on if someone trusted you, your family, it depended on your family's reputation and whether they would do business with you or marry your families together or whatever. It all was dependent on your reputation, and your reputation was determined by how well you conformed. And so that's what I was taught from a very young age. So even though I'm older now and I feel like, oh, I can speak my truth with other people, I don't feel that way in that community, and that limits the community. And it keeps the boundaries of the community kind of really in a stasis because of this anxiety of like some kind of an economic or, social loss that would be experienced if someone was not, conforming to the idea of what was acceptable and respectable in the community. So I'm hoping all that makes sense. But one thing that Karen said was that, like, one of her, I forget what her challenge was exactly, but she comes at it from a kind of mindfulness perspective of like, and that kind of made me think that if I'm, when I'm interfacing with these people, instead of having this anxiety that, oh, they're going to judge me and it's going to lead to all of these different kinds of losses in my family and a loss of respectability and acceptability. If I were to just look at it from a mindful perspective and kind of step back and say, okay, if they don't like the fact that I'm X, Y, or Z person, that I'm artistic or sensitive or whatever, rather than worrying about how it's going to affect me, I need to kind of distance myself from it and recognize that it's their thing, not mine. And it's an old thing that no longer really serves a purpose. So I can kind of like dismiss it that way. Not really, I guess not dismiss it, but rather engage with it differently. And that really, like, I don't know, that just helped me kind of open up my mind to see it differently, because like when I'm in that situation, I feel like I'm 10 years old again.
So true, Garima.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing forward your experience. And I can really feel the life that the practice is giving you. And it's exactly that, right? When we go home sometimes, or we go into the community that raised us, we go back to a younger version of ourselves, and your community will also, benefit ultimately through you being able to bring your more, your capacities and your more mature self forward. It might be challenged by it, and also it will benefit from it, and clearly you will. So thank you.
I think we have Larry raise his hand.
Larry.
Yeah, I have kind of different, maybe you have to use the word opposite experience of Garima. I've been a developmentalist professionally since 1978. I'm not a psychologist, but and something I've been very comfortable in doing, not only with clients, of course, is creating a developmental context, container, whatever you want to call it. So what you could call a mistake I have made is assuming that all people in the world want to be growth and developmentally oriented. Even in SDI. So what I've been learning is yes and no. We do, but we want to feel some degree of safety in that. And I have faulted in not being, even though I was told in my last breakout that they think I'm super safe, and I would agree. People can feel intimidated or rushed or too much too soon. I was talking to Tom about this recently. I got on my calendar, not too much too soon with people. And so bringing so much openness and presence and aliveness can be very intimidating and upsetting and scary for people. And I'm having a real hard time getting this lesson. I've been dealing with this lesson for, I mean, consciously so for, geez, at least 10 years. And so what I've tended to do is go back more into a green space, and not showing up too much, just being very super safe. And I don't like it. I don't feel like me. Fortunately, I do have a group, a collective I'm part of that I shared in my first breakout. That we're all very much about that. We call it the We Be group, and we're very much about that. And we are caring and supportive of one another, being able to be that in that space. So my cutting edge is how to work more by invitation with people. I feel invited to show up as a developmentalist in front of them. It's been a struggle.
Yeah, thanks for raising that so fully, both clearly in your own practice and experience, but also I think you name a challenge and a tension in the developmental field, and something that I mean, there's certain principles and ethics, I think, that that people can have their developmental practice guided by, but clearly the principle and ethic of asking for permission, sensing what's being invited and called for, and also noticing that our own intentions for others may not be the intentions for themselves, and ultimately that we can do harm in the name of that. And I personally love to work with the polarity of being and becoming. And to a certain extent, we can hold development itself as coming home to who we've always been and have perhaps forgotten. And so it's actually not about going from A to B, but it's actually a deeper integration. And that in and of itself can often feel like a tremendous safety, and also embracing ourselves and each other where we are, while also honoring the parts of ourselves that are yearning and sometimes struggling to grow. So it's easy to talk about, and it's harder, I think, sometimes to do in practice. And it's just deeply necessary. And I, again, sort of from a place of feeling humble and humble to this field and its own evolution over time. My own sense and my hope is, and I'm interested to hear from others around this, but it feels like the ethics of practice are maturing, and I truly hope that that's true. And one of the things I notice we talk about in our work is just noticing how our development itself is not a static thing. It's something we're always perceiving from our own subjectivity. And so sometimes there's more of an impulse to, want to grow ourselves and others. And other times there's more of a kind of rocking back and being in presence or in the present moment. And that appears itself to be an iterative pattern. But anyway, so thank you. Thank you for bringing that forward. So important.
Gene has his hand up.
Gene.
That was beautifully said, Abigail. Just my experience is that what we're learning from these kinds of experiences is that we're not separate from each other, that we are actually, to even say we're connected is not true. We're a unified expression in all these different forms of expression. And when we really experience that closeness and that intimacy of being a part of each other and a part of one another, it makes me feel safe and secure and at peace and at home with others in all of your expressions. That, how I see what that's going to do is to relook at the entire world, our entire expression of how, if we're not separate, how to we redefine and recraft our relationship with all living things and the planet and our economic system, et cetera, so that we actually do cultural and social transformation as well as individual transformation.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, that for me is a sense of hope and possibility. And, you know, I asked in that we presencing meditation visualization, you know, like what does life look like from this place? And, you know, when I think about like, what does life look like from the place you just evoked, and what might we co-create together, and how might we then be able to really address some of the systemic injustices and harms, I feel a tremendous sense of possibility there. Thank you. Phyllis. And I'm just going to acknowledge time where I think we're just a few minutes away from needing to move towards closing. Phyllis?
That last comment really touched me, because I was thinking during this practice that there's a real difference between looking at the planet and looking at the geopolitical things that are going on in the planet. And that I can imagine that the more that we can be in an I-we space in terms of the planet, because we are in an I-we space. We are I and we are the planet. You know, you know, there's no, it is truly a polarity there. I mean, that's a real polarity. And I think that if we can, the more that we can separate that from the geopolitical world, which is really not an I-we space. It's really, for the most part, at least an I-them or an us-them space. And so I don't know, unfortunately, how much this practice addresses that, but I think that there's so much room for how much it addresses the planet as our home. And
yeah, thank you. And that again evokes I think the humbleness, the humility, which is that, you know, and I in this moment just thinking about Brian Swim, who said that, you know, our power has gotten ahead of our consciousness. So just that recognition that we're still growing up or growing, waking up, growing down, waking down as humans, and learning how to be sufficient and appropriate with what we have, you know, in our sphere of responsibility. And we're on a journey. We've got a ways to go. So just as you said, yeah, thank you. So I believe we'll be closing. I thought a quote by Teilhard de Chardin might be a fitting way to close, and I'm going to read it, and I put it in the chat, which is, "We are one after all, you and I. Together we suffer, together exist, and forever we'll recreate each other." So you know, as we close, just a lot of gratitude and appreciation for being in the practice with you, for following along with what I wanted to bring forward. And I look forward to more opportunities in the future, and happy to be in touch with anyone about questions, topics, things that were evoked from the work today. And I know that there'll be an after conversation for those that stay around as well. I'll pass that on to whoever's taking over next. Thank you.
That's me. Big hand for Abigail. Thank you. That was great. So we're at the end. Thank you all for joining us. We do have an open conversation now, starting on the hour. And Abigail, do you have some contact info for us that we can get a hold of you? Oh, I see. It's coming in there. Okay, great. And thanks again. So quick reminder to join to visit our website, sandiegointegral.org, for upcoming events and the place to donate. We probably don't have our March 26th on the website yet, but we have it up in Meetup. So those of you who can make it at that time frame, it's 11 o'clock Pacific. Our presenter is presenting from Belgium, so we're doing it in a time slot that's appropriate for her, and we can bring in some more of our European friends, and some people won't have to be up in the middle of the night like Keith is.
Yeah. And good night, everyone.
Okay, good night, Keith.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to go to the, any other announcements from the leadership team?
You want to do the next two presentations?
Sure. Yeah. Next month we have Sally, Dr. Sally Adams Jones. I don't have the title up. Do you have that up, Tom?
I don't. Sally, you're still here, I believe.
Yeah, so we're going to look at identity, who am I, which is the perennial question, but trying to go through a couple of practices to help us disidentify with our gender, which is like a surface manifestation. So in other words, move a little bit from the he, she into the it space, which is that move away from identifying from our bodies a little bit. And so I'm going to explore how gender tetra-arises in Wilber's language, and also introduce something called integral Taoism, which is something I love and I teach, which is tracing the various ways that male-female binary has shown up across the world. In China as the Tao, in India as Tantra, in the West as spiral dynamics, believe it or not, and also feminism, and how these things, if you stand back and have a look at it, there's a wonderful fluctuation going on in our development. So if we see that as the swing, as Abigail was talking today about agentic and communal, that's kind of the swing we do in our development, and that's yin yang as well. It's a little bit. See you next time.
Sounds interesting, fascinating. And Tom is on May 14th with We Space and the Highly Sensitive Person. Do you want to say anything about that, Tom?
I'm still debating how I'm going to present that, both to SDI. I use it as my format to try it out before the Integral European Conference. And I'm playing with the idea of how does people that are highly sensitive show up in intimacy? Is it an advantage to actually have that level of sensitivity online, or is it a constant frustration? So some of that, those of you that know me, is a little bit of personal frustration, but that's what I'm playing with, and what I think I'm going to do in May.
Yeah, and in June we're scheduled to do a recap, which we do every time there's an Integral European Conference. So I want to encourage those of you, it's going to be all online again this year. They canceled the in-person part. So it's pretty phenomenal if you can attend. Many of us do. And then at in that June meeting, we report back on what sessions impacted us the most and why. And those have always been rich. So we welcome you for that too. So Tom, do you want to take the conversation from here? And thank you again, Abigail.
Yeah, and you're certainly welcome to join us, Abigail, if you have to run. You know, I really enjoyed this presentation, and I know the GTC people and Abigail were going to be great. But boy, we are really in the infancy of learning how to experience the collective. When I think of my goals early on, both for SDI and other people, my ambition far exceeded my ability to realize this, because there's so much complexity that interferes with us showing up collectively. So, I mean, the fact that some of you like Keith stays up in the wee hours of the morning, or Jesse in Australia, it's already tomorrow, you know, that we show up to these events, we can feel the hunger, which is a collective hunger, to actually resonate with people and join with people. But that would be my starting comments of try to get this idea going of, and what Abigail did so well, I thought, is stop pointing the finger that they don't get it. It's what I'm doing in the moment. Liz made that comment in one of the breakouts, which I thought was really powerful, is what am I doing in the moment to inhibit the collective? I think shadow is always a bad note to end on.
So since you mentioned me, I'll just speak to that. Yeah, thank you, Abigail, so much. I was really impressed by the focus of that question. And I was just about to type you a personal note to say thank you for this notion of ownership of, how am I creating this pattern in the collective? I don't encounter that very often, and I think it's profound. And I also think in some ways, at least this is how it appears to me, it's the only thing over which I can, it's the only thing with that I can work with, really, is like when I couch it in terms of what's my part, what's my piece. And yeah, so thank you for that.
Maybe I'll just say briefly that, yeah, I mean, I think it's, in a way, it's a sense of empowerment to have a sense of what we can do to work with how we're contributing and contributing to co-creating the experience, because it gives us, maybe it's whatever you call that, a locus of control is somewhat internal, and we can probably overdo that as well, because again, it is always in the relational field. But one of the things that we work with is, as I was mentioning, is we do individual shadow practice, but then we do collective shadow practice. And to me, it's so stunning how, first of all, individuals take on roles in groups, as I was referencing. And, if somebody steps out of the group, oftentimes another person takes on that role. So it seems to be a function of the group itself, not residing in the individual, but when you yourself are in that role, like getting out of that is a hard thing to do. There has to be a commitment, both to, for yourself, but also from the group, that we're gonna open up and liberate these patterns. We're not gonna continue to perpetuate them. But when we do the collective shadow work, it's that feeling of, it's like we almost can't see each other because we're projecting all over the place, right? And I just sort of take the view that to an extent, everything I see and experience is, to some degree, a projection. But how might we start to pull back those projections so we can encounter each other, fresh moment to moment, because we are also have the possibility to be fresh moment to moment, to release ourselves from the habit patterns of the self. So, and what I love about it is so scary for people, and it deepens trust. It is so liberating. It's healing oftentimes, and we know, each of us knows this from when we, turn towards a conversation we've been avoiding and it actually goes well, which can happen. It's like, oh, that thing I've been avoiding is the very thing I needed to include more of or turn towards. It's exactly what I needed to deepen the relationship, but also to free ourselves from the struggle of avoidance. Anyway, it's profound and powerful, and I think that there's so much here to learn around doing that more actively with one another.
That's so great. And I'm so excited to re-listen to everything you just said in the recording too. It's interesting because I often find myself in the role of someone who is sort of poking the patterns and sort of shining a light and saying, hey, I'm seeing X, or I'm observing X. And it's my experience is, yeah, my pulse is quickening. And it's like, it takes this energy and this, it's work in a way, because yeah, it does feel like it's a little bit flying in the face, and it is scary. It's harrowing to a certain degree because it's new territory, first of all, and it's completely unknown. And it's what I call sort of going out in the skinny branches of the tree, if you will. I don't know, is the group going to hold the are people gonna, things gonna kind of go awry? And so, you know, as I'm doing it, I'm also trying to hold my own presence and my own sort of self-trust and the trust for the group, and sort of maintain this feeling of a safe space. So there's sort of like a lot going on, sort of awareness for me of the group I'm in, that I'm speaking this stuff to, that I feel sort of like I'm naming things that haven't been named perhaps before. And it's a lot. It's like it takes a certain level of energy. And if I don't have that energy, I feel reluctant to go there. It's like if I haven't slept and ate well, even, it's like I don't have it to do this. So yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot. And we know too that the moment we stop being able or willing to bring forward the places where we're struggling in a relationship and or in a collective, there's a certain amount of giving up on the possibility for that group to include the individual that you are, you know. So I've noticed that in a work context more recently, as I turn away from you know, holding the possibility that something else is something more is possible. I'm begun my exit strategy functionally, because I can't, you know, so we gotta find a way to do it, because it's also gonna the exhaustion sometimes comes from bearing the unspoken.
Yes, and also I can feel, when you just said that, also resistance, like actually, like my belief in the possible resistance that I'm getting back, and my resistance to the conversation itself is also is sapping energy potentially too, instead of just being like, what's actually present. Nobody has said no yet. Yeah. So,
and we all often have so much more capacity than we give ourselves credit for, but it takes a certain amount of nervous system integration, certain amount of health in ourselves and in the group. But I don't want to presume too much of this, but what I experience, and I can speak about this in a maybe thinking about it sort of Western European, there's so much holding back from conflict.
Oh yes.
And we're suffering tremendously from that.
Yes.
You know, what struck me when Liz had first said this is the complexity of what you have to hold to show up and open a communal space. But I was kind of loving watching her do it, as she picked each word very carefully and very informed in order to carry that moment. I mean, it's really like creating music. You know, the violinist isn't just randomly, it's meshing together in a harmony that it begins to be able to be tracked more easily. So even though there's complexity and burden in that, it seems like we reach a level of competence where it just flows. And it is picked deliberately with carrying the right intent in order to signal enough people as possible this is a safe space to enter together. So I'm sorry to hear your anxiety, Liz, but I absolutely enjoy watching you do that.
Thank you. And you know what, Tom, what you just said about intent actually is a really helpful reminder to me, because I have found that that's often my something that shores me up in the doing of a conversation like that, is reminding myself of my own intent. And I've even said that in some of the difficult family conversations that I've had. I've literally said it out loud, and I've had someone say back to me, well, why are you telling me that? And I'm like, I'm not telling you, I'm telling me. You know I'm coming from a good place. I'm doing the best I can, literally out loud reassurances. And it's had me able to be present and stay with the challenge of the conversation and come out the other side, frankly. So that's a helpful. Yeah. Anybody else?
So I would ask people, do they feel inhibition, or do you feel in license now that you're armed with good intent?
Little of both. To Abigail's point, there's this huge resistance to conflict. As you know, Tom, and some of the others in SDI have been dealing with that in SDI and other places, trying to get people. trying to be a space for people that they will more willingly lean into the possibility of conflict, not for conflict's sake, but because there are things that if we can get them on the table, get them between us, get them among us, and feel into it and know it better and learn from it, the collective can be moved forward a little bit more. Call it growth, development, advancement, whatever. And in my I don't like conflict, and I've said this before, but I'm willing to engage in it because I know the value. And so what's been important to me is to be with conflict. But my challenge is how to help other people by not getting in the way of them being willing for themselves to be with conflict. This is a little, it can be convoluted because my being willing to be with conflict, people, and I've heard this from people for 30 years. Larry, you like conflict? No, I don't. But what that does to them, it tends to shut them down from being willing to engage conflict because they see me being willing to be with conflict. Just the opposite effect that I want to have. And I know we all, having our postmodern propensity, sensitivity, and wanting things to go smoothly and take care of one another, which is all good stuff. And how, from an ethical perspective, we see how that can be limiting to moving through things that need to be moved through, or needs, not the word I want to use, healthier for the collective, for the group, to move through them. There's an old model, I forget the psychologist's name, 4 phases of group development: forming, storming, norming, performing. Postmodern resists that second phase just tremendously. And even in SDI, to put this on the table one more time, there's a huge resistance to the storming. And people don't seem to, integrally, it's easy to be aware of that going through the storming takes us to norming, getting clearer about, more in touch with, yeah, what do we want, what don't we want, to get that conversation on the table. And the forming brings together all these individuals and all these differences and the ups and downs, ins and outs, lefts, rights, all that, whatever. And the storming is once all those differences start to show up together, that's when the storming happens. And the storming has to happen if you want to get to a healthy functioning group, healthy functioning collective, in my experience, in my opinion. And I'm still, like I said earlier, I'm still navigating how to presence myself in all that so that it's truly facilitating a healthy movement in the group, not shutting it down even further because I'm too much too soon.
Thank you for that. Susanna and then Eric.
My current edge is actually knowing when to be pointing out elephants in the room and when not to. If there's somebody else who can do it. I've been doing it and I've been called the contrarian and other lovely names because I do not generally not speak up when I see something that affects a collective. That has included integral, that has included the now the, what is it called, the in the development goals, all over the place. And at some point now, I wonder how, you talked about role, Abigail's, how come that role seems to land on me? It's almost like people are waiting for it to happen. And so my edge is, when do I not do it and just see it do its thing that I think is really dangerous, like weird, Western educated, industrialized, that kind of perspective. Or all of us, almost all of us here today were pretty much, weird, maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. And we can't get out of that. And so that's a big issue in the world. How do we not colonize the world with our ideas of what is the best and the real and the growth and all of that. Anyway, it's becoming just a dilemma for me, a deep question of what is my role.
I just to respond briefly, Suzanne, as Juan, I've so appreciated you speaking up in the ways that you do, being provocative around these issues, and also, I think we can always ask ourselves, but do you still hear me? Because I think my headphones are switching, but we can always ask the question, for the sake of what am I speaking? Where am I sourcing this from? And if I didn't, what else might that liberate in the collective? In other words, not that, by staying silent, it doesn't automatically invite that from others. And though we can hold one individual responsible for playing that role, and that itself is, it's a self-perpetuating dynamic, but it actually doesn't help us all take responsibility for what's not being spoken. So it's a dilemma for sure, I feel in here.
Eric?
Yeah, Eric.
Yes, hello everyone. Yeah, so I'm loving this conversation and curious about weaving in some of the things that we're talking about in like a real-time little experiment I would like to invite. And I feel some nervousness in doing that, in that, from where am I speaking, I'm feeling like, oh, maybe this has something that would be contributing to this space and our exploration together. And then I notice my little contractions into self. It's like, what, me? Take on that role? Being contrarian, whatever. But so here's the invitation for anyone who would like to join in. I'm just curious what would happen if we were to take our hand, and here's neutral, and just say, oh, my level of connection in this moment, when I feel it go down, I just kind of lower my hand a little bit. When I feel it going a little bit more, I can raise it up. And what would happen if we were looking at each other and seeing other hands and noticing responses and going like, oh, what do I notice? Oh, that person has their hand lower. How does that make me feel? And what happens when I bring it up? So I'm curious if people would like to join me in that. And if not, that's fine too. You have full, but just to feel what I notice, even just looking at others raising their hands, for me, it's like, okay, some people playing together. And part of the invitation is just to feel inside what's happening to you if that moves up or down. Why is that? Perfectly all right to be what it is, but just to go like, oh, I notice this, or I notice this. I notice Tom smiling, and then I feel myself going over like, oh yeah, it responds, and then I see Abigail smile, and then I look around and I see, their faces. Okay, Kathleen, and what does something as simple and silly as that have to feed into what we're doing together? What are we learning together? And if you need to rest your hand, that's fine.
It's an interesting exercise, because nothing like being rated to get our collective attention, although I'm not sure it's the higher self. So if you want to drop your hand on me, go ahead. I'll just check out.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to hear any experiences. Anyone who's grinning and going, or someone who's going, no.
It brings up the question of Abigail's kind of been bringing up with her questions of, what's good about conflict, what happens when conflict doesn't happen, and it's but it's a different angle on it of what happens. So much of normal conversation is about, nothing really changes about the level of connection. And it becomes a question, what are things that could happen to increase connection? And when is that appropriate? And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. Just to say, one of the things that I notice in me that happens in real time is like when I'm asking a question, I go like, oh, what am I doing? You know, kind of a quasi facilitation move here, bringing that in. So there's a bit of a contraction. I noticed that I wasn't listening very closely to you in the first few moments when you were speaking, Kathleen. And then I felt myself kind of coming back. There was like, okay, I can leave that behind and become more curious as to what you're saying. And I can feel that now as I look around the space. It's like, do I just see a sea of windows without beings in those windows? Or what is it to actually start taking in the presence of everybody who's here? And just noticing there's a quality of attention right now that I really like.
I like Susanna's comment in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Excuse me. You know what I like about it too, Eric, is we're going to have to develop instrumentation in order to measure these things as we operationally define them, because otherwise it stays in the realm of metaphysics and it doesn't really get quantified. And so I do like this because it's a crude rating system, but it's a rating system nevertheless. And I think we're going to have to learn how to do this. And we're just starting it right now, and it has a possible judgmental quality to it. But what happens in time when we use it as feedback to what we actually create in the space we've defined? You can see how it would really fine tune it and offer more clarity of what we're trying to do. So I do like the exercise. I think it's very worthwhile. Any other comments?
A couple hands up.
Yeah, I was going to move on if there's no more comments.
Could I make a brief response, which is I always feel so enlivened when somebody puts themselves, on an edge, as you just did, and also made that evident to us, Eric. And I partly feel a bit sad about, how it can be so hard to sort of stand up out of the collective and offer something, that there's experiences maybe in myself that have felt like I get punished for that. And so I just feel so enlivened. And I do feel that part of our work is to, as we cultivate our capacities to be vulnerable to one another, I think of it as our porousness to each other and to life, then I can actually start to trust my own sensing of how, where people are and how they're experiencing. So I think, having a gauge is interesting. I think there's other ways we can gauge, right? And part of it is just asking, but part of it is also trusting our own sensing of the field, and also the energy, for each person individually and then as a collective.
And I have just one other comment, and I want to go to the people with the hands raised regarding what Tom had said about the measurements. Yes, and the other piece is how interesting that that's sort of speaking to our culture of having to measure and quantify everything. And perhaps it would be as valuable to look at something in a way that's not doing that, but because the whole nature of this thing is to be in the mode of sensing and tuning into the things that we don't use that don't lend themselves to quantitative analysis. Like maybe that's actually something that we need to elevate itself. And I don't really know where to take that beyond that. So that's it.
So Ellen?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to see if you can see me. I'm in the dark now. I don't see me, so. I think is the name Eric, speaking from presence rather than about presence, which was an immediate invitation at a meta level. And the entire exercise, although gauging and measuring, was also a shared language, a shared experience. He created a shared language. So we were co-regulating, and it completely, I felt it really engaged us. And it, you know, it sort of bypassed the entire, for me, the entire aspect of it, which was gauging and measuring. It bypassed the measuring mind, and it felt like it centered me and us, my sense of us, in the heart. And I think that's really a guiding, I mean, in terms of what I think Larry, I don't have the whole screen up, so I'm going from memory. Larry, everything that you were saying, I could really relate to in my own experience. But I think that the heart is such a guiding light in terms of calling us into presence. What is actually being invited here? What's being called for here? So that our own, you know, and then going back to the discipline of stillness, of silence, so that we can really hear that instead of that kind of evolutionary drive that wants to keep pushing towards a greater realization of the awareness of interbeing and you know, our evolutionary thrust, which I think we also have to be willing to be that person that names the elephant in the room, and be willing to be the irritant and the pearl, if that's really what's calling us, to really embrace our own idiosyncratic individual signature within the whole. So yeah, I think I covered a lot of the things that I wanted to say throughout the conversation, and excuse me for being off camera or in the dark. Thank you.
Yes.
We see you. We see you, Ellen.
I love evolutionary Russ.
Thrust.
RUST?
Yes.
Love it.
It was not the right exact word, but it was the only word that came to mind.
Is there anybody who hasn't spoken that would like to jump in?
Garima, had you had your hand up a moment ago? Okay.
Tyler, Phyllis, Shara, Sandy, Mary, Karen?
Well, I'll say
Gary?
something. I'm kind of gun shy lately. I've been working on how I keep getting myself in trouble in groups and not having a filter. So I mean, I can relate to some of you people that say you point out the elephant in the room. I do that, but I do it from a feeling point of view. Like I throw myself right in there with emotion and try to pull that out from the group. And I'm trying not to do something like just watching myself more. I'm working with an integral therapist to look at this. And the very topic you talked about, Abigail, was looking at the polarity between the unique whole and the participating part, and looking at what will come, the positives, both of those, and the negatives for me. So I'm really trying to work on that right now. So I just kind of holding back a little bit today because I just don't want to get in trouble again. So that's where I'm coming from.
Oh, you can get in trouble with us.
I feel your pain, Sandy.
Thank you.
Bye, Phyllis.
Are we running low on energy, or?
To me, it comes down to attention where are we putting are we consciously choosing where to put our attention as opposed to falling back into all the habits that we work so hard on ourselves to come through? And as we've lived through them, and at this stage in my life, I'm working on some habits that were formed in my early childhood years that I'm seeing how they have shaped my entire life and my interactions with people. I mean, we don't come to the end of this kind of work, but I'm seeing that the attention, as we grow in consciousness, we grow in capacity to choose where we put our attention. And to me, that's the bottom line. I think Ram Dass said attention is energy. Thank you, Ram Dass. And in my spiritual tradition, my teachers make it very clear. Attention is the outgoing faculty of soul. They're talking in traditional terms, but our Buddha nature, our pure consciousness, who we really ultimately are. Where we put our attention, we're putting our soul energy, we're putting our Buddha nature. That's the most powerful energy there is. So learning to put our attention in the most beneficial ways, and if that means naming the elephant in the room, then doing it in a way that is an open flow rather than laying down the law, always doing our own shadow work, being aware where I'm coming from. But I think that's probably enough to say, because that ramifies according to a few other things we've talked about. But I'll just say, to me, it comes down to where do we put our attention, and then that's the intention. To be aware if there's some subtle judgment or some really gross judgment or some overlay of, oh, here's where I want this to go. We learn to take that all back too and just be present with our attention. So I just kept hearing, in my interpretation, I kept hearing that come up over and over again during these last 2.5 hours.
And to piggyback on that, Karen, where we put our attention, that has kind of a quality of what we're focusing on. And just as important in terms of a choice point is where we're focusing from, not just what we're focusing on, what I call locus of awareness. Where are we looking from, regardless of what we're looking at or attending to.
Yes, are we looking from a place of judgment, even if that's very subtle? Or are we looking for a place of trying to control, even if that's very subtle? So it's the pure presence, the ability to be purely present and open to this other person. At the same time, we're aware of where we may be coming from. Yeah, and that's another polarity right there.
I'd like to speak to something. The idea that when we're talking in these groups and we're like we had connections in the breakouts and stuff like that, but it seems like when we get back into the main group, that there's a lot of teaching going on or a lot of downloading going on. And I just wanted to point that out, that's what I'm seeing.
I'm gonna go soon, so I don't know if you all are gonna stay on, but I just wanted to say thank you. It's really been a pleasure and an honor to be here, and to the extent that it's helpful or of value, I've really experienced this space, this after conversation has felt like there's been quite a bit of really staying in and being in the practice. Yes, I've also felt or noticed, some moments where it felt like something wanted to be taught. And I do sometimes notice my own, and I might have done that myself too, but sometimes my own energy dropping around that. But I really have felt people vulnerable to themselves and the practice. And I feel blessed by that. And it's just been a blessing. So thank you all. And I look forward to more and other spaces, and good night for now.
Thanks, Abigail.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Let's do it again.
Let's.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night. Say hi to Jeff.
I have a question for Eloy. When you spoke about teaching, since I'm a relative newcomer to this group, is that something that this group tries to avoid?
We haven't talked about it. I don't think it's been mentioned. It was It was just something I was noticing. So I just,
Okay.
to me, it takes me out of the space.
Mhm.
Like, you know, I covered my ears or something.
Thank you for bringing it up.
That was an edge.
Yes, definitely.
I can kind of relate to that, Eloy, too, in the sense of like, I find it for myself helpful, and for me making observations of my own experience and hearing that from other people is my sense of them, or my experience of connection is greater in the experiencing of their self-observation or self-reporting or self-sharing, as opposed to teaching. And teaching versus reporting, like if someone's reporting on an experience, that's a different experience than sort of teaching an experience. So it's a sort of can be a subtle distinction, but yeah, I found myself sort of having a same little bit of somewhat of a resistant experience too. I can find myself slightly derailed. Yeah.
Well, I will simply ask, was my comment about locus of awareness and looking from, was that experience as a teaching moment?
Yes, a little bit.
Good, good. That's what I wanted it to be.
I also wanted to ask whether or not monitoring was interpreted as a teaching in a way that was off-putting or contracting to anybody there.
Oh, I felt you when you were talking.
Is that Ellen?
You
Yeah,
felt
that was
me
Ellen.
when I was talking. You felt.
Yeah, yeah.
You felt I was teaching, or you felt
No, I
me,
felt you.
or
I
what?
felt you.
I
Like,
don't.
yeah, the difference is when there's a download, it doesn't, I don't feel the person. I feel I hear the lesson, but I did feel you when you were talking. So.
Yeah, because that is something I play small, I hold back. Sometimes I have a lot of wisdom flowing and I hold back because I don't want to be doing that. And allowing, like, when I was talking about the idiosyncratic individual signature, I mean, in this moment. And it's also recognizing not taking so much of it on myself, although I really work to take responsibility for the way I perceive my reality and my part in the play of the whole. The more I deepen into inner being, the more I realize that it's all dynamic. We're all part of, it's like somebody else I might be channeling someone else in the group, and not to own it so much as my wisdom or my thing. It's just, this is what's coming through us right now, through this particular mouth, this particular body, mind, spirit. So it's like where to, it's awkward sometimes to know, what to allow to flow on that level. And sometimes I might step in it without realizing, So excuse me in advance if I didn't already do it.
I experienced you, Ellen, though, as sharing your experience, as more sharing it or reporting on it, or describing the experience than sort of teaching.
Yeah, I think it's a valid distinction, teaching versus sharing, but I don't think it's an either or. Is the history of this group, it used to be all teaching. And we slowly evolved into more experiential. My interpretation is the Europeans heavily influenced us in that direction. I remember Sandy Brim really wanting a lot more experiential. And it's been useful, but I don't think it's either or, because being able to language our experiences is very important. So there's some unknown optimal balance. How can you be in the waiting room? You're here.
She's switching from her phone to her computer.
Oh, I see.
I think that would be a really cool thing to have conversation about the notion of the two perspectives, because I think the way you described it, Larry, the locus of I can't remember your phrase right now, the locus of perspective,
Awareness.
awareness. Yeah, I think that as an idea might be a really useful something to explore. Because I don't think it's personally, I don't think either. There's nothing bad about either one. It's simply my experience receiving people sharing when they're in one perspective or one awareness versus the other is really different in terms of how connected I feel with them. So it's, yeah.
Can I just like talk? Okay. I didn't want to like say anything. No, the whole like difference between teaching and like sharing your experience, I was gonna say the line blurs for me as well, because I feel like I've learned more through my life experience than I have just through school or just like, books and things like that. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it, because, I love school, but like, I feel weird talking about my experiences sometimes, but like, it's the best way I know how to impart a point, but also reach someone on like a level and like try to connect with them. Because like sometimes if you try to teach someone something like in a purely academic way, it might not reach them as well as like having an experience. Because like when you talk about an experience, people will like feel empathy for you, and it almost like opens you up more, I guess, to actually kind of understanding something that might not it might not be a part of your past or your history and stuff.
Thank you.
Well, that's interesting, Garima, because what I was thinking about in some of the last couple people that spoke and about teaching, when you spoke of your personal experiences, I really could remember, and it touched some of the things that I know I've gone through during the, coming from a little tiny town in the Midwest and needing to break away from a huge family and a place where everybody knew you and everybody had expectations. And I just felt like I had to blow this pop stand and go far away, far as possible. However, I mean, and all that was good. And I did a lot. I'm always seeking and learning and expanding and all of that, I think. But every time I would go back there, I would have these wow, aha moments where, especially related to something you were saying, I recognized that they would all say, oh, she's the courageous one, or she goes out on all these adventures and things like that. But I saw them as courageous to stay where they were in what I was judging a limited environment and atmosphere, and still being able to be their distinct personalities. And so I was really appreciating and admiring, especially my one sister, that, she is really herself, and she stayed there in what I would say is a suffering, stifling environment. But, I just, I think I just could identify with a lot with what you're saying, and that's good. It's all good, and you're doing beautifully.
Bye, Tom. Eric.
Yeah, I'm curious to get some reflections. So as I look back on the chat, and I noticed something about that little experiment that I tried, and yeah, and it's interesting for me. I feel some vulnerability because I'm, coming into a group that I've only shown up here once before, and it's like how do I calibrate? I mean, there's a whole rich thing there of like how I imagine I have freedom to explore or not. But I see Suzanne put something around, something like that last exercise brings up the question of coercion, group mind, not wishing to be different and less cooperating. And I'm just curious if some people would be willing to share with me, what was your experience of my doing that kind of thing, and whether positive or negative, or just curious how that lands and what that reflects of my stepping in. I'm aware of the ways that I'm kind of like in my own nervousness and not as attuned as I might be. But yeah, I'm open to hearing anything.
I liked your willingness to just, because that's what I would do. I mean, I liked that you just kind of said, let's do something together as a group. And so I really appreciated that and felt like some kind of connection with you. And I was sort of like, oh, this guy's interesting. I hope he stays in our group. I felt like I wanted to make you part of our group. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I found that when you provided some context, which was that you felt a little uncomfortable doing it, but you had something that you felt called to do, and you wanted to try and experiment. And I thought that, like I felt you in that, and I do think that, like if, for example, next month you come back and you do another one and it takes 4 times longer, you know what I mean? Like it's establishing a pattern of like, let me just use the word commandeering the group to teach something that was like maybe tangential to the subject. I found that to be problematic sometimes. I didn't find that with you today, but it does raise a concern that's what happens for me. Like I find myself disconnecting from the group when people are bringing in, like I gave this example in a presentation a few months ago that I did, which was that we had a breakout group and somebody they had their shtick that they did every time they talked to anybody. And then when we went back to the main group and they said, what did anybody learn? And they repeated the exact same thing that they had said in the group, in the breakout group. And for me, there's a thing that I find myself reacting to that, because I feel like we have potential for generative space here, where I'm experiencing something new, something that I didn't think of before. And I find that sometimes people are bringing in things, and again, sometimes it's the same thing every month. And so there's a whole thing from, like, I am triggered by that to some degree in groups, because I've been in groups where people stay present and they stay present and they're speaking in the present moment of their experience. And that seems to me to be generative. That's where new ideas come up, where I have revelations that I never had before. But so again, there's a dynamic there that I'm sensitive to, but I love the way that you did it, bringing context into it and sharing an edge, and and trying something that was of limited duration, so that it didn't become what the meeting, didn't become a presentation by Eric, because it was a presentation by Abigail. Like, she's there as an invited speaker and she had a topic, and I think it's important. Like, I think it's helpful if we stay on the topic, which I think yours was in that space as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's an edge for me too.
Sure that. I enjoyed it more than I expected to. I'm a morning person, and at this time of day, my energy has already started to tank. And so by the just in the 30 seconds before you brought this little exercise forward, my attention had kind of just gone wandering. And when you proposed it, my enthusiasm, I was thinking, I don't really want to do this, but okay, I'll play. So I actually I think I had my hand at the lowest level of anybody who showed their hands. And just, okay, we're trying to be straight here, but I'm playing, I'm on the field. And then I found that my energy and interest revved up. And so I ended upping the level as we went on. So basically the whole thing's kind of, it struck my humor and my curiosity, and I ended up being really awake and really present again with the meeting. So it was like a little energy boost for me in that sense.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll also just toss it, there was a part of me that thought, I think Eric should be one of our guest speakers one of these days. Like, you bring a lot, just in the limited time I've experienced you, you bring a lot to the table. So I'd love to see a presentation that you are, where, give us material to work with. I mean, I feel like, I sense that that's something that's potential.
Thank you very
that
much.
voice, you could read the phone book and it was like I was walking, and your voice was like, oh, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Karima?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. You have a great voice, but also I'm gonna kind of disagree with the group. I didn't necessarily love the exercise, and not anything on you, but I felt like I was being graded. Because I don't know, I've been like I used to get told a lot I was chatty as a kid, and I wasn't always good at listening, and I've gotten better at it now, but so it just kind of brought me back to that, which is, it's kind of my own thing. But then I come at it, when I think about it from the perspective of this group, and like you guys see things really differently, and I like that, at least from what I'm used to. It's more about, it kind of like energetically hooked everybody up, where it's like we're all kind of one web. So anybody was down here, they came up here. Anyone who was here, they came up here. It's like, so that was kind of cool. But like my instinctive reaction when someone does that is to say, yeah, I'm not doing that, and turn back into like I don't know, just like very rebellious child, not like, I don't know, not cool, but it's a cool exercise. It just like wasn't for me.
Great.
What was your intention? What were the meta understandings that brought you to do that inspired you? Do you know?
Yeah. Well, I think from, the experiences that I've had in a lot of different groups over the years, and the invitation that Abigail was giving to not be talking about, but to be from the experiences, like this impulse arises of like, oh, this could be energizing and interesting in a way, no matter how it goes, whether it's a flop or whether it's, liked or whatever, that it just introduces an element of novelty of like, oh, how do we respond to it? Because it's calling all of us to bring our attention a little bit more than we would be, if we're thinking in our individual ways and evaluating that and taking our notes or whatever. It just kind of brings some focus. And I was curious how that would affect group dynamics, because that seemed to be a lot of what we were playing with as the theme for tonight, of the I and the we, and where do I move between those. And then, so there's different layers happening at the same time. There's, what's happening in the group, but then in me, as I said with, I think it's Kathleen, that, oh, wow, I just noticed that I was kind of checked out. I wasn't really there. And that comes and goes. I mean, it's like just watching that alone is pretty rich. But then to track, how does it go in the group? Do I feel resistance, or what do I do when I see Suzanne's comment and I go like, oh, question of coercion, and then I go like, wow, I thought I was being invitational, and some maybe perceive that as coercive, and it's like, I don't want to be coercive, and then I get another loop of thought, which is then taking me further from presence with the group. And so it's kind of like a real-time practice thing for me and for all of us. And my hope is that it serves by just mixing things up and being a little bit different. So hope that's starting to address what you're asking, Ellen.
Yeah,
I don't think she was.
Sensed. And it had an emergent quality. It didn't feel preconceived, like you were doing this exercise with other people and wanted to, bring it into us or something in some pedantic way. It felt emergent, and it also felt like it created coherence and our like a co-regulating kind of thing, a shared language, a shared experience. It immediately put us all in a shared language. I thought it was really interesting. And verbally, it was like, oh, the comparative mind, the measuring comparative mind. I had a little bit of rumble, and plus I wasn't really, I was walking, so I wasn't really doing it. And then I like stopped to look at everybody, and I kind of brought up my arm just to kind of feel into everybody, to feel what we were feeling, and I thought, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, I think that was the kind of coercion that Susanna was talking about. Like, it's not that you were coercing others, but if you look and you see everybody's hand up, there, that's, the group dynamic coercion, I think, is what she was addressing.
Mm-hmm.
It's play. It's play. It's,
Mhm.
it's all how we frame it. I saw it. I had the grace to see it in a very positive light. On another day, maybe not so much, but today I had the grace to see it this way.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Larry, it looked like you were about to say something.
Yeah, Eric, it's been a long time. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Yes, many years.
For a decade. I liked your intention with it. I liked it in the moment, the spontaneity of it. And what I noticed was I was feeling a little awkward in terms of where was my hand. Am I being accurate? Is my hand accurately presenting where I am? And so I got a little bit stuck in that. And then as I looked around the group and everybody's hand, that raised mine a little bit to see, oh, we're all kind of in the same place with not with our hands where they are, but we're all doing the hand thing. There's kind of a collectivity about that. That's nice. And then as the seconds went on, I had the sense that there wasn't much movement going on in my hand or anybody else's hand. And so it started to feel static for me. And you were sensitive enough, or were you able to, like, not that you noticed that same thing, but you were able to wind down the exercise, or however it wound down. I don't even recall anymore. But so I liked your intention. I liked the process. And it kind of worked its course pretty quickly, which was fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, let me add. Your microphone is so professional, it's actually distracting to me. Anybody else having this experience? Like, everybody kind of comes in at the same volume and the same quality of voice, and your volume is actually seems higher than everybody else's, and it's much clearer and it's more resonant. So for me, it's functioning as a distraction, whatever that's worth.
Okay, good to know that. I had no idea.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Maybe I'll have to listen to a recording and then I can see, because I don't get that feedback in real time. I obviously don't hear myself in my own microphone. So it's like, I think I talk softly, but maybe it's gains in the microphone that it amplifies something.
Yeah, we're at 7 o'clock now, and I'm ready to go. So I don't know if anybody else wants to host from here, but thanks for coming, everybody. It was great to hear all your comments, and
thank you.
Join us in 2 weeks if you can for collective presencing, or next month with Dr. Sally.
And for what it's worth, I didn't mean that as a teaching moment, Eric. To Eli's point.
Okay, well, good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Good night.
All right, bye. Recording will be up in a couple of days.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.